Greetings, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for joining us once again. This is the third and final session, which focuses on the late sculptor, painter, and philosopher, Ernest Mancoba. Last week's session, I'm very happy that we hosted three beautiful speakers, Imru Bakari, Kemangwali Huleri, and Pro Sobopa, as well as Tando Mama. If you missed that session or any other previous sessions, please head over to Art and Ubuntu Trust's YouTube channel and catch up over that side. Today's session, we are not only looking at the work of Ernest Mancoba, we're looking at his words, as well as his inspiration, which finds itself into his artwork. To do that, we have, let me see if some of our guests have arrived. We have Bridget Thompson, who would be presenting the poster series. Thereafter, we will bring closer a curator, as well as the artist, Philiswa Lila, who is in the room. And we also have Amuhelang, which I don't see in the room, who will come a little bit later as our discussant. To perhaps give an introduction, but also to give the presentation will be Bridget Thompson, and I would like to read her bio, which is not very long. Bridget Thompson makes social documentary films rooted in South African and African social cultural history. Her films have been shown on most continents, translated into many languages, been shown on local and international television, won prizes at film festivals, and been shown in some distinctive situations. She also curates art exhibitions and directs the Art and Ubuntu Trust, an NGO concerned with art education in peri-urban and rural areas in South Africa. Her educational work is informed by 4 years as the National Audiovisual Coordinator at the SACHEG Trust from 1986 to 1989. I will not go to read Bridget's bio, which is very, very long. Then I would like to give you a very short bio of our guest, Lila. She's an artist, curator, and scholar, was born in Umtata in the Eastern Cape. Lila works across disciplines like painting, installation, exploring different mediums to create her artwork, including animal skin like sheep, goat, and cow, beading, wood, paper, canvas, and video. Many of her techniques are linked to forms that will lift body or the recording of stories using body as an archive, and traces personal experiences and performance art. Thank you, Philiswa, for joining us today. We will hear from you a little bit later after Bridget presents the poster series. The posters are 13 tops. And if you would like to speak, or if you have any questions as Bridget presents, please note them, write them down, and we will take all your questions after both speakers have presented. I would like to head over to Bridget to firstly give us an introduction of the poster exhibition and then present the work to us. Hello, Bridget.
Thanks, Sipo. I'm ready to go. Malik's going to put up a poster which just describes the nature of the project for which these posters were produced. But yeah, there, it's coming now. So these posters were produced for the Ernest Mancoba Education Poster Project, which ran over 2 years. And the people that you can see on the left of the poster, I'm not sure if you've got a full screen in front of you, this was a group of artists and filmmakers who worked together going to the different points on the map. As you can see, we went all over South Africa, and the statistics are given 2 years, 9 provinces, 17 venues, 14 artists, and 2,100 people came to the different workshops. So this was a significant outreach project. It originates with Ernest Mancoba exhibition, which was curated in 2006, 2007, and in fact, that poster can go now, to commemorate Ernest Mancoba's passing in 2002 and to commemorate the 100th anniversary of his life. And this, this exhibition was actually, sorry, Malik, can we come back to the poster in a little while? We'll start with the second poster in a little while. You can see my face until I finished just this intro talk. Yeah, so I just feel a bit nervous seeing the poster because I'm supposed to talk to the poster when it comes up. So I just want to explain about the exhibition. So Abdul Qadir and I had met Ernest Mancoba in Paris in 2000, and he passed away in 2002, just a few months after doing his really important interview with Hans Ulrich Obrist. And I would suggest anybody who's seriously interested in Mancoba consults that interview. It's very rich and comprehensive. So the exhibition was to commemorate his 100th anniversary, to acknowledge his passing. It had been 10 years since since Elsa Miles's big retrospective exhibition at the Joburg Art Gallery. And it was called In the Name of All Humanity, the African Spiritual Expression of Ernest Mancoba. And the reason for that is that I had said to Ernest, between his two exhibitions, the one he'd had in Joburg and the one in Cape Town, I looked at his work and I said to him when he came to Cape Town, I said, it seemed to me that your paintings are paintings of mourning for your people. And he said, Bridget, never forget, my people are the people of the whole world. And that was the root of the naming of the exhibition. So the exhibition it was supposed to run for 3 months, it ran for 9 months. There were many school tours, and there was the French ambassador at the time and the French cultural head of the French Institute at the time said, please take it to Paris. That didn't work out. There wasn't an available gallery, or there wasn't an interested gallery, let's put it that way. And so it didn't go to Paris. But at the same time, Paulo Jordan was Minister of Arts and Culture, and he said he had this longing for the works of great South African artists to be made into posters and shared around the country. And I thought, well, why not? I grew up in a rural town. I didn't see art on gallery walls until I was in my late teens. But my father used to get mail order books on great European artists, and I used to love looking at them. So I thought, well, why not make posters? It's a way into art. I didn't realize at the time that the beadwork that I saw people wearing on a daily basis was art too, but that comes later. But it provided one of the keys for understanding Ernest Mancoba's work. Anyway, so we hosted the exhibition. It wasn't able to travel. It had some very extremely valuable works in it. And so with this proposal from Paulo Jordan, we made this poster series to use as an educational tool. So that's the root of these posters. The exhibition itself obviously was 3-dimensional. So the posters are 2-dimensional. So there are certain concepts that were in the design of the exhibition which couldn't be repeated in the posters, but most of the works in the exhibition are on the posters. And the works are there, and then and every poster has at the bottom some words from Ernest Mancoba, because as Sipo's pointed out, he was a thinker. In fact, Nimrod Ndebele and Jabulo Ndebele's father, who was one of his friends in 1930 South Africa, along with A.C. Jordan, Govan Mbeki, Abi Tabata, Jane Ngulangul, Gerald Sakota, Eddie Rue and others, regarded him as the leading intellectual of his generation. And there's a lot of value in the things that he said as well, and his art is just another story entirely. So the exhibition had 3 results. It provoked us to form the Art in Ubuntu Trust, which we've been running now for 16 years. It provoked us into this really large education project, which allowed this team of artists and filmmakers to travel all over South Africa, engaging with artists, teachers, learners. And it also allowed us to develop a productive method of analyzing and understanding Ernest Mancoba's work. By the time the exhibition was conceived, there were a number of quite big international curators who had paid attention to Ernest Mancoba's work. There was Inwezo, the recently late Inwezo, Nigerian curator, who'd included him in the exhibition The Short Century. Oguib, also Nigerian, was writing about him. Dennis Ekpo was writing about him. Salah Hassan was writing about him. So there was this international attention, and Rashid Arain as well, the founding editor of Third Text, who has a kind of complicated relationship with an understanding of Ernest Mancoba's work, because on the one hand, he really seemed to understand that it was very path-breaking in terms of the history of art. But on the other hand, he struggled with the notion of the African spiritual in the title of the exhibition. He felt it was chauvinistic and jingoist. And I'd like to really comment on that, because I think, especially those of you who heard Pro's presentation last week on the meaning of the ancestor in Ernest Mancoba's work, I think it's very difficult for all of us who've grown up with this notion that the universal arises out of a dominating culture, that the universal arises out of a culture that imposes itself on the rest of the world, that there is another kind of a universal. There's a universal that is rooted in the notion of Ubuntu. There's a universal which is noted, which is rooted in Africa, which comes from Africa, which is about equality. It's a democratic notion of the universal. So that is the intent in which the African spiritual is put forward, because as we go on to unpack Ernest Mancoba's work, we begin to understand that the African spiritual in his work is nothing other than Ubuntu. So I think at this point, Malik, I think it's a good moment to look at the first poster, the one which is number 2, which is yes, there it is. I hope you can read what's at the bottom. If in case you can't, I'll read it out to you. It says, African art is a heritage which belongs to all mankind and which we must carry for our survival, because if we lose contact with our heritage, then we risk to disappear. And I think this was very clear last week in the reading the Ancestor, the short film that we looked at. But if you can see how this poster is conceived, the title, of course, is Africa, Cradle of Humanity and Civilization. And underneath it, we have the Sankofa Bird. The Sankofa Bird, which is part of the collection of the museum where we had the exhibition. It's the bird, it's a word from the Akan language, which is from Ghana. And it's about a bird that looks back towards its tail. It's looking back to the past to find a way towards the future. And sometimes it even has an egg at the back on its tail. This particular one doesn't. And it felt very appropriate to have as the opening symbol for the exhibition, because one of Ernest Mancoba's sayings was, what are we leaving on the way of this so-called progress? Then if you look at the map of Africa, it's the Peters projection of Africa. It's not the little short, stubby, usual image that we have of Africa, which is in fact inaccurate, geographically inaccurate. Africa is in fact as long as it seems to be represented here. It's even, Africa's even misrepresented in the maps. So this is a Peters projection. You can look it up on the internet. It's a more accurate reflection of the shape of Africa. And if we start right at the bottom, you'll see a little string of shells. And those little shells are the Blombos shells, which were found in the cave here in the Western Cape by the archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood, who played in those caves when he was a child. And these caves and the pieces of cross-hatched ochre, which were found also alongside it in the Blombos cave, are dated to 70,000 years ago. And they are the first evidence anywhere in the world of human beings exercising their brains, exercising their capacity to make art. So we become humans as we make art. The map of Africa, as you can see, is decorated with beadwork. And we go further north and we see some cave paintings, which are they're only 2,000 years old. The Blombos shells are 70,000 years old. I think every school child in South Africa should know about the Blombos shells. Over Madagascar, there's a small Stone Age implement, which when Ernest Mancoba used to teach in what is now Polokwane in Petersburg, he used to collect what's called the Petersburg Stone Age culture. He used to collect stones. And remarkably, when I went to find these in the museum, I discovered that their colors resonated with the colors in his paintings. And then we have 3 masks from West Africa. Two are Dogon and one is Kota. And Egypt is represented as well through the hieroglyphics and through the figure. Because he perceived Africa as a unity. He didn't agree with that separation of the civilization of ancient Egypt with sub-Saharan Africa. And there's a remarkable woman, Barbara Tyrrell, who traveled around South Africa in the 40s and later, painting and drawing people's clothes, people's indigenous clothes. And I had an encounter with her when she was deep into her 90s. And she showed me a painting that she'd done of my memory, I think it was the Tlokwe people. And she said, look at this headdress. I couldn't believe it when I saw in the documentary on Tutankhamun that this is so similar to the headdress of ancient Egypt. Look, this is an anecdote. There's more work to be done, but the work started with Sheikh Anta Diop, the person who the university in Dakar is named after, and who was an intellectual friend of Ernest Mancoba in the 1950s in Paris. They had a very important exchange. So this poster and the next 2 are contextual posters for Ernest Mancoba's life. After that, we'll go into ones which deal more with his work. But he was in touch with this knowledge. Oh, I'm sorry, I've forgotten to mention our very famous Ladenburg head, this from 750 AD. It's sort of roughly where Congo Brazzaville is on the map, just to the left of the rectangular shape. Yeah, so of course, those of us who grew up under Christian national and Bantu education, we were all miseducated to understand that there was no civilization in Africa until the white man arrived here in 1652. However, we have there the Ladenburg heads from 750 AD, which conclusively explain that there's another civilization. And of course, there have been many other discoveries later. So I think we'll move now to the second poster. I hope you've had a chance to think this through. The second poster is simply a story of Ernest Mancoba's life. And it's his relationship to African art. One of the whole points of the exhibition was to try and tease out a method of understanding his inspirations from South Africa. Many people have said, he engaged African art when he got to Europe. He didn't have exposure to African art until he was in Europe. He was shaped as an artist and as an intellectual when he got to Europe. And this is really all nonsense. This was the greatest intellectual of his generation, leaving South Africa, having grown up on the mines, having been given a Shangaan name, Ngongonyane, having been familiar with all the costumes and all the art of the people who were on the mines in his youth, having traveled throughout South Africa, having studied at Fort Hare, having been part of a left tradition in the Western Cape, having been a participant in the All African Convention, having influenced in very profound ways, for example, Governor Mbeki, who really adored him, because he introduced Governor Mbeki to Marxism through Eddie Roux, through bringing Eddie Roux to Fort Hare. He introduced Gerald Sekota to Van Gogh's work and so on. So this was no tabula rasa going to Europe. This was a fine intellectual who said, his words were, "I wish to participate in the great universal debate where Africa, though present by its ancient sculptural masterpieces in the possession of collectors and museums, and in the opinions of so many European thinkers and artists, had nobody to speak for it, and remained mute, even in elements of dialogue that concerned directly its own civilization and culture." So that was his very polite way of saying that he engaged with the dialogue in Europe, which had obviously started with the Cubists, on his own terms as an African. And then he says, and the photograph of him is a still from the film, there's a stick which I carried from Africa. So I had African objects with me to encourage me on my way. A very subtle way of saying, I saw African art before I left South Africa. A very polite and subtle way of saying that. So let's move on to the next poster. Again, all of these works were on the exhibition for very particular reasons, to explain the way he was inspired by different cultures in the world. And he says, one of the things he says, which I find so beautiful, he says, it is this vital balance between the individual and the collective, between spirit and matter, between tradition and progress, that our culture needs to find again, without returning, if such a thing were possible, to a past that no one will ever revive, but by finding again the fundamental values without which no human society can last, and which are in essence universal, and to be found in any particular society, culture, if one digs deep enough. So in this poster, you'll find, let's start in the top left-hand corner, that is ceramic from the Zapotec civilization in Latin America. Then we have again the Sankofa Bird, representing Africa and looking to the past. And again, we have, I think, Aztec ceramics. And by the way, all these beautiful things are found in our museums. Then we have some Chinese ceramics, which relate directly to his experience on the mines, where there were Chinese indentured laborers working, and where he was given as a child a Chinese ceramic cup, which really touched him very deeply. And I realized that it was both the fine work of the cup that he appreciated as a nascent artist, but it was also the culture of gift giving, which for him was compatible with Ubuntu. And the next thing is an Indonesian silver bowl, which is in the museum here in Cape Town, as a result of the people who came here, both as political prisoners and as enslaved from Indonesia, from the East. And one of he was very good friends with the Ghoul family in Cape Town. And he was very happy to participate in their Ramadan celebrations because he saw in Ramadan, again, Ubuntu. Then we have this is, I think, from northeast United States, in fact, from Canada, a soul catcher, the totem figure, which features so strongly in his work. Then we have reliquary figures from China, and they, the reliquary, the Kota reliquary figure is such an important figure in his work. And so again, there's this connection between the cultures. Then we have an Indonesian character and an Indonesian shadow puppet, which refers to his appreciation of the language of shadows, which Charlie Chaplin, how he described Charlie Chaplin's work. And that language of shadows was very important to him. And then we have again a Chinese ceramic bowl, and it's also 750 AD, like the Leidenberg heads. So this is an attempt to show examples of cultures that he appreciated, engaged with in different ways in his life history, and to express, as you can see, there's a faint map of the world, again with the proper projection of Africa on it, to give you an idea of this universalism which he espoused. Now, we'll move on to the next poster, and the next three posters deal with form and content in his work. So in the center of this poster, we have the Bantu Madonna, which was his first carving in 1929. And then we have on the left, the figure of the musician playing an ohadi, but I think Keman corrected us last week, that's not an ohadi, the ohadi is the one without the resonator on the shoulder. This is another name which I can't recall now. And on the right is a figure of a woman, which we were allowed to photograph by the owner, but we weren't allowed to have it on the exhibition. And then right in the front is Double Unity or Double Verity, which was his last sculpture made in 1950. He eventually stopped sculpting. But this Bantu Madonna was, in a way, his work in it was in a way to some extent derided. And he responded to that very strongly in the Hans Ulrich Obrist interview. And this is a small extract from the interview. He says, for the African artist, it is not so much the abidance of certain rules, though he too generally works according to particular canons, that makes a thing beautiful, but its capacity to evoke the inner being by the strength of the outward aspect. To that effect, he uses all means, both figurative and abstract. And he said, and in continuing this, he continued to say he hopes that people can feel the African pulse bursting through his Madonna, which was unique in South Africa at that time, in that he modeled Madonna on an African woman. And we, in that tour of the country, which I showed you on the very first poster, when showing this poster to some school children in Mpumalanga, they said, we can't believe this, that the Madonna can be modeled on an African woman. So 100 years after it was made, it still had resonance and meaning for South Africans in the very innovation of modeling the Madonna on an African woman. Let's move to the next poster. In this poster, on the left-hand side is a depiction from the Danish kalkmaleri, the murals on the walls of churches that were done in Denmark in medieval times. And when Ernest Mancoba was there with his Danish wife Sonja, just after the Second World War, they were beginning to unpeel to take away the paint that had been painted over these murals and reveal them. And he found this very, very moving. He was very moved by them. And also, if you go deeper into their history, you'll find there's a lot of storytelling in these ones. This is a Madonna and Child. It resonates for me a little bit with the work that Keman did with Gladys and Goodland, whose work in Googlelet. On the right-hand side is an oil painting by Ernest Mancoba with the figure modeled to some extent on the Kota figure, which we'll discuss a little bit later. You can see a shape in the middle of the painting, and the two are linked by beadwork. And again, we're underlining the universality of his message, but I'll just read the words, especially because they are a bit tiny. When I make a picture or a drawing, I'm always aware of the space which is at my disposal. At the same time, I'm aware that the thing that I'm trying to express has to be an organic whole, and that it must not look like a section of a vision, but it must be a vision which is integral. One touch leads to another, and this touch, if it is color, calls out for another, which will answer rightly to be represented in a dignified way, in a way that is acceptable in all senses to its presence. I stand back and look, and step by step I move, until at last the whole is present, and it can speak to me, and I can listen to the message. So on the one hand, he's talking about his method of painting. On the other hand, he's talking about Ubuntu. Each one is represented in a dignified way. So let's move on to the next one. Here we have a painting which was really a remarkable experience for me, because while we were preparing the exhibition, the National Gallery bought this painting and they'd struggled to buy it. It was difficult to raise the money. You know, all our galleries and museums are kept on a short string and so on, but they didn't know which way up to put it. And they asked me to come in and tell them which way up to put it. And I hadn't seen Mancoba's work now for a number of years. And it was a very emotional and powerful experience, because I started to see stories in the apparently abstract work. If you look, I won't go into that now because reading the Ancestor does that very well, but it's worth meditating on this and seeing if you can find stories in it yourself. But essentially what we're trying to do here with this poster is to explain the Kota effigy, which you can see on the left. And again, to link through the beadwork, link it back to Southern African color combinations. The Kota effigy has a strange resemblance with the central figure in my painting, not only formally, but also as to the destination it was supposed to have. And he carries on to say that the Kota figure stood over the bones of the ancestors and was a very important part of the ritual of remembrance of the ancestors and the protection of the heritage. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And so anybody who's living in Cape Town, you can go and see that painting at the National Gallery. Unfortunately, they've put a horrible frame on it. Okay, now in the film I made on him in 94, he spoke about the totem. He said the totem is the concretization of our origins, our ancestor. So here we have the shadow catcher, the dream, which we managed to find in the vaults of the Iziko Museum. And here, if you look closely, you can see a totemic figure in the middle of the work. And we can go into a deeper discussion of why the totem was important to him. But this is trying to explain that and allow young art students and so on to begin to make that connection. But to move on to the next poster. Okay, now here he says, the artist is in harmony beyond space and time with the ancient world and artists in his awareness that spiritual and material values have to be reconciled. So this poster has these hieroglyphic representations, again, miraculously found at Iziko museums. And one of his 1950s works, which almost looks like a topography of South Africa, and the colors to me are so South African. And you can see the ancestral figure perhaps starting to appear in this work. And then beneath it is one of his 1990s works, where there almost seem to be a sequence of figures dancing. And it also seems to be a language as well, a language that he evolved. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This one is I really love. Well, I love all of them, but this one is really, really nice. Those of you who are familiar with South African history will recognize Bambata in the photograph with his shield in front of him. Bambata was the last person to conduct a purely anti-colonial struggle in South Africa. He was killed in 1906. His head was cut off. Postcards of pictures of his head were made and sent by British soldiers back to Britain. And if you look closely at the work, you could almost imagine that there's somebody standing there with a sword and a shield, ready to fight. But if you read the words, he says, some of my political friends told me that the artistic activity was not the most urgent thing to concentrate upon while our people were undergoing such a terrible plight. But I believe that art was precisely also a means to produce a higher consciousness in man, without which any practical achievement would probably sooner or later deviate and miss its point. Therefore, making art, I thought, was as urgent as working for the political evolution. So this poster brings together the necessity of the political resistance, the anti-colonial resistance and the liberation struggle which ensued thereafter, and also the whole notion of a spirit defending people and the question of consciousness. And it's so interesting, this question of consciousness, because if you've participated in the sessions with Lefifi Cladi, where he speaks about art, nothing more than about raising consciousness, until in the end we don't need art at all, because we are so attuned and so sensitized through all our senses that, you know, we're in touch with nature and we almost don't need art. And then you also think of Steve Biko, and he said how material want is dangerous, but spiritual poverty kills. So what became apparent to us through this method of trying to understand Ernest Mancoba in his own context was that ideas and values and philosophies that are deep within South African society are apparent, and across Africa, but for the moment we're trying to understand South Africa, are apparent in a number of leading thinkers in the 20th century South African, whether they are politicians or writers, jurists, artists, and so on. And it was really very rewarding to have the collaboration of the late Professor Ntongela Masilela on the project, because he had sketched out this family tree of 300 more intellectuals, which he dubbed the New African Movement. And he wrote a lovely article for the catalogue for the exhibition, locating Ernest Mancoba within this movement, which was very rewarding and very helpful. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that Ernest Mancoba was a particular genius, but we need to recognize that his ideas and his values were taught to him by his mother, taught to him by his society, and he took them and elaborated them, and took them to a higher level. But we do need to understand those roots. So going on to the next poster. Okay, now here he says, poetry is symbolic. It needs to be said by poets and understood by the general population. We have to hold on to this heritage of poetic language. Everybody must be ready to carry this thing hand in hand together. And the works we chose for this poster, and I have to mention as well that Abdul Kader, who made the Reading the Ancestor, also designed the posters with input from myself and Woody Oliphant, who was working with us at Art and Ubuntu Trust at that time. And the posters consists again of one of those 1990s works where he seems to have his own language, his own hieroglyphics, his own pictograms. And the character who you see on the top left-hand side of the image is Nkai, Samuel Edward Crooner Nkai, who was known as the Mbongi of the nation. He was an enormous influence on the 1930s generation, of Mbeki, Mancoba, A.C. Jordan, and so on. He died, I think, in the late 40s, 48 or so. But in the 30s, he was commenting very vociferously on politics of the day in poetic language as an Mbongi. And that picture was taken in 1925 when he performed for the Prince of Wales's visit to South Africa, and had some really scanting things to say about British colonialism in poetic language. And then, of course, we all know about the love letters in the beadwork. And so that's suggested through the beadwork, that's included. And then again, we have the Blombo shells, because my understanding of what Mancoba says when he says poetry is symbolic and needs to be said by poets and understood by the general population, I believe that he's referring to what marks a civilization. And what marks a civilization, what marks human civilization, is the capacity to think metaphorically. And that's why we include the Blombo shells, because that's the first demonstrated proof of that capacity to think symbolically. And I think if one goes deep into the values and the art expressions of Bantu civilization, you will find this metaphoric language in dance, in music, in poetry, in art. And what he's saying is that we have to hold on to this in order to remain civilized. Everybody must be ready to carry this thing hand in hand together. Artists like him and others are fairly dismissive and concerned about the turn in the arts towards the literal. Okay, let's move on to the next poster. This one is really special. The work itself I'll come back to, but the two little figures are little Inuit sculptures, which again we found in Iziko museums. And what he says, and he says, I asked him about the difficulties, and again asking him about why he stopped sculpting. And he says, the material that one uses is secondary. For example, the Eskimos in the north, they used feathers and they used fish bones and they used all that they could get to have expressed in a tangible way something to be left for coming generations. And this work is very modest in size. It's ink on paper. And again, you can see the totem figure in the middle, the ancestral figure in the middle. This one looks more like a child than some of the others. And it has some strong black markings on it. And it was extraordinary when we were in Mpumalanga, and one of the sessions that we had was run by 3 sisters who were expert Ndebele painters. And they explained Ndebele painting to us in Ndebele, which I didn't understand. It was later translated. In fact, I think Sipho helped with the translation. But they did speak the words, the names of the colors out in English. And as they were speaking, I must roll a little bit back. In another session in the workshops, he looked at the colors. And I was convinced that there was a relationship between beadwork and his work. But my reading of beadwork wasn't as sophisticated that I could say, okay, well, this is Ndebele, this is Xhosa, this is Zulu. And but once he said it, of course, I saw that those colors resonated with those different regions of the country. And I must just give a caveat here, is that in identifying those, the particular way colors are used or inflected in different parts of the country, I'm not suggesting any kind of relationship to color. Just it's natural. I mean, the colors in the Eastern Cape are very muted, and if you live in the Eastern Cape, you know there's so much mist. There's, you know, these clouds rolling over. It's natural that the colors there would be muted in that way. And in KZN, it's very bright. You know, it's natural that the colors would be brighter. But it was so interesting that this beadworker, you know, and we have this contradiction in our society where we have beadwork in our museums and galleries, and it's called art, but beadworkers are called crafters, and we don't understand the huge body of knowledge they carry with them if they're still working within the old systems, if they're not working, you know, completely to satisfy a tourist market. I mean, for example, in the Eastern Cape, you know, in the Xhosa language, there are many, many different terms for red. If you go to an art school, you will taught Titian red, perhaps, but you won't necessarily get a schooling in the different shades of red identified in the Xhosa language, and so on and so forth. So these colors are really, really exciting to explore. And what was riveting about Mrs. Msiza and the way she identified these colors was that later on, when I was able to read the translation of the colors began to make sense of the meaning of the work. And it began to tell a story about an injured child's body. And if you look in the bottom right-hand side, you can see 3 figures, and it may not be big enough to see, almost suggesting something like the Hector Peterson image. And so it's starting to look at this work and interpreting it in terms of the colors that Mrs. Msiza outlined, and then looking at the signature, and lo and behold, it was done. It was just extraordinary. And that really made it very clear that this work is far from abstract. It has very, very deliberate meanings. But of course, one has to allow for the viewer's dialogue. It's not explicit and it's subjective. But this was really a eureka moment for me with this, the connection between Mrs. Msiza's explanation of Ndebele colors and the reading of this work, and the date, the date of 1976. And it really confirmed for me that we really need to really engage. Sorry, I'm saying really 1,000 times. We need to engage South African history, South African culture, South African indigenous knowledge systems for our own sake, but also in order to understand Ernest Mancoba better. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, this is the last one, and this is the Ancestor, which you are, if you watched the film last week, you're familiar with. The Ancestor is a really exceptional painting. It has an exceptional history too. And it's been interpreted by other artists last week, as you saw, by Abdul Qadir in the video art, and a most beautiful tapestry has been made of it. Joseph and Glovo will feature next week in ArtSat, described by Marguerite Stevens, who runs the Marguerite Stevens Tapestry Studio when he was alive, as the greatest weaver in South Africa. So the words we have here, so we won't go deep into the Ancestor. It's been interpreted by other artists and written about. Elsa Miles has written about it as well. But just to say, here it's one of my most favorite sentences from Mancoba, and I use it as my signature in my Art Ubuntu email, and it really gives courage for the work that we try to do in art education at the Art Ubuntu Trust. He says, art is not just to give pleasure to the eye and the senses, but to give courage for the continuation of our community. So there we have the Ancestor together with some rock art. And thank you. That's the last poster, and back to Zepo.
Thank you. Thanks, Bridget. I would like to thank you actually for this very important presentation. I think, this is maybe the first time in the 3 series that focus on Ernest Mancoba, where we get to see his consistent orientation. We see how he in his practice, his occupation with using symbols and sometimes events to affect how they mean. And I think, what they mean, I think before maybe we go into Philiswa, because Philiswa's presentation is going to be slightly different to yours. Maybe we can take a couple of questions and then, is that okay? Do you suggest that? Take a couple of questions or comments from the floor, and then go to Philiswa. And then if later on there's someone else who would like to say something, then we could come back. Are there 2 questions? And then if we don't have questions, we can head straight to Philiswa. We're very shy today. Okay. Maybe we can go straight to Philiswa.
Yes. Hi, Zipo. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Okay. Welcome, Philiswa.
Thank you for having me here and for inviting me. And thanks to Bridget for providing that background information on the posters. Because my first question, of course, I saw the people who were involved in this project, but I still have this question on who put the posters together. Was it the same artist putting the posters together and making that association, or was it the curator or the people involved in the curatorial process of the exhibition? So I don't have an in-depth background on Mancoba's work. I'm a student. So I'll just maybe start from an encounter I had of his work that is the most recent for me was when I was in Paris in 2019, in a residency at the Cité des Arts, and Alicia Nock at the Pompidou curated an exhibition of Mancoba's work. And that's where I was exposed to his work, like face to face, not really seeing them on the books or online, like images and stuff like that. So, and one thing I picked up from that exhibition, just looking at his works, were these like lines in his paintings, especially because I painting is one of my favorite mediums that I use myself. And when it's the medium that I went to school. I was taught how to paint, if painting can be taught, but yeah. So, and in my work is also very abstract, and looking at his work and seeing these lines, these marks, this mark making that he does, made me realize how much, I don't know, we're sort of deprived in a way to express ourselves in how we're taught and how we can apply and use lines in our works. And I'm saying that only because what I see as the finished artwork in Mancoba's work is actually the beginning of my painting process. So I start with this mark making where you just making lines and putting paint very spontaneously on the canvas. And then you have to blend those colors together in order to have this outcome of a painting that can be presentable to, I can say to my lecturer, because that's how I was taught. So it was never finished. It is focused on paintings. Like I said, that my medium is painting. So I was focusing on painting. I was in this moment where when I do paint the work and be very close to the artworks, I like when I'm putting the colors and just applying them spontaneously. I think it goes with that quote where he says he's able to move backwards and look at the artwork constantly stepping back, you know, so that relationship, that communication that you have with the work is very important, which sometimes I do miss in my work because I'm constantly in the work and not really that I'm in the work. I'm in a flow state in that moment, and by the time I step back, not that I've made mistakes, but some of the things I see or I get to see out of the work, they're very outside of what I would have liked as an outcome, but at the same time they work. I don't know if I'm making sense. When you're in a flow state, you're very much into the work, the artwork, and then once you step back, you see all these interesting things happening. So it's never a constant back and forth relationship. For me, it's never like constant moving back and going into the painting, which is quite interesting in what he's saying in his words and in these posters. And when I encountered the work, I didn't have this background information as well on how he produced his paintings. So, and it was a first encounter with the works, and there was a lot in that exhibition, also a biography of Mancoba, and a lot to take in at one go. So that's the first aspect. And also, I kind of feel like art speaks to its maker first. So it speaks to you first before it goes out to the viewers or the public. So I'm very much interested if there's anyone who might have answers to this in terms of Mancoba's relationships with his work as he was working, or anybody encountering him while he's working, and how he actually interacted with the canvas and in his mark making and his intentions as he was making his work, and after effects of that, how he then explains himself in the moments where he's in that flow state. And made a few notes here. So another interesting thing that was that had an impact on me in that show was the Madonna the sculptor. So I've always found it interesting and very interesting to see it in person and seeing the techniques that I used, which I don't have background on as well, like, because I don't use wood, but it was a very interesting piece of art to finally encounter. And thing with these posters more specifically is this use of Mancoba's work and the museum objects. And I'm saying they're museum objects because Bridget has made us aware of that. At first, I assumed that maybe they were part of Mancoba's collection of objects, some of them, only because you can see in the picture where he has the stick in hand, there's a sculpture there and other objects. The sculpture, I think it's from, it's by her wife, Sonia. And at the Pompidou, actually, they had both exhibition, Mancoba's exhibition and Sonia, Sonia's body of work in different rooms. That was also a very interesting encounter, because at the landing of the landing, you immediately saw Sonia's work at the Pompidou. So we went around and there was even a speech. And then we went around Sonia's exhibition without any communication on where can we find Mancoba's work. So the artists that were featured in that exhibition, the Mancoba exhibition, actually came to the Sonia space and made us aware that the artworks by Mancoba were in another room, and it was interesting to have those dynamics as well. People in their relationships, but in how they were treated, they are still treated in their careers. They occupy different spaces and they occupy different discussions. Also different discussions in terms of their backgrounds. And yeah, I think it was in the film as well, because I attended the film where he spoke about the small room where they work together. And I think a relationship between that working space and having these two exhibitions existing in one room could have had a more larger impact. But yeah, it was the choice of the people at the Pompidou. So yeah, I'm also interested to know about the ancestors, because I didn't listen to last week's discussion, and not to repeat what was said, but in him drawing an ancestor and interpreting an ancestor, how does one go about doing that? And is it a conscious decision that an artist makes to draw their ancestors, or is it something that just comes about, or there's somewhere where he actually spoke about how he gets to express himself and speak about or paint his ancestors. And this, of course, is in connection with this idea of home, like many homes or no home, no specific home, or remembering and having memories of home or missing home. And I guess feeling isolated to some extent, because yeah, Paris was kind of isolating for me. So what I also find interesting in the posters, of course, is this relationship with the beadworks and the mark making. Bridget did say it's hieroglyphics, and a way of writing that is very symbolic. So there's a language there also in relation to the love letters, and them specifically being associated with Zulus. At the same time, when you see in museums in Europe, especially in how they curate such objects, it's always, they're always grouped together if they're coming from South Africa or coming from Tanzania. Unlike at home in museums where they're even more divided into different cultures and different contexts of their traditional use. And the traditional use of certain objects, and especially the beadworks. And yes, you mentioned the colors as well, the significant meanings that are brought to these beadworks, and the gender hierarchies that are also used to communicate the different use of these objects and the different use of colors and who's wearing what, which color for what specific reason at that particular time in their life. And so also in my work, I do use beads, beaded sculptures. And this began when I went to the Eastern, I am from the Eastern Cape, but I was based in Egini at the time. And I started seeing more of people wearing beads and like on a daily basis and specific colors, these blues and black and white. For some reason, they started appealing to me. I started asking more questions about this idea of culture and tradition from my own perspective of where I come from and how I grew up, which is what I do in my work. It's at this moment, it's more about asking questions and asking questions, of course, my parents, but also from things that I saw, and now being able to understand them as an adult, because more and more they are opening up, like the elders, they're opening up to being questioned, or they have to now teach us certain things, or certain things that were considered secret and sacred, because we have reached a certain age, a certain age where we need to then take over in a way. So there's certain age groups also, like I said, these hierarchies within the family. There's certain age groups that if one passes, then another one is recruited into a certain position. And it's things that I'm finding interesting now that they're opening them up, whereas we're not taught them from when we were very young. So these relationship between beadworks and the artworks themselves, the language that is written there, which I do not understand, I cannot decode, but it's a language of color, it's a language of line, it's a language of, I guess, expressing yourself in a different way. And I'm saying different only because it's not like any other thing I had seen in terms of how I was taught to make art, because to make something like this maybe would have meant you because you were even taught on how to draw a line and where to place a line to some extent. So yeah, I'll stop there for now, Zipo.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Philiswa. I wasn't quite sure if you're frozen or you're still with us. Thank you. You also posed a couple of questions, but I think there were Bridget, when you were asking about who created the posters. But before that, I open up to the floor and also ask Bridget to answer you, I would like to go over to Amu, because Amu is experiencing some problems with the connections. Amu Helang Muhajane is an artist and curator at the Northwest University Gallery in Potchefstroom. She studied fine arts at TUT, majoring in glass blowing and ceramics. And by being exposed to the Constitutional Court art collection, she became intrigued at how the collection was put together. She then studied with Wits for a short program in curating and moved to Cape Town to pursue an honors degree in curatorship through the Center for Curating the Archive at VUCT. And later she went to study for a master's degree in library information science with a specialization in digital curation. Amo, are you there? You wanted to pose some questions and also to comment on our presentation today. So I would like to hand over to you, and then we could, come back again and discuss with the rest of the audience. Hello. Amo helang. Please unmute yourself and switch on your camera. Amo. Okay, maybe while we wait for Amo, Bridget, Philiswa was asked, her first question was, who created these posters?
Okay, well, the posters were designed by Abdul Qadir, but based on the exhibition which I curated, and Woody Oliphant and I together did research, we put together, because the posters, as I said, they're 2D, the exhibition was 3D, so there were concepts and ideas within a 2D poster, but Woody Oliphant and I sort of said some of Ernest Mancoba's, not necessarily, some of them were, and that's the design of the Ancestor and of the African Madonna, the Bantu Madonna, Kwesi Gule, who is the director of the Johannesburg Art Gallery. Is he still with us? He was with us a little while ago. Anyway,
Yes.
yes, there he is. Yes, so welcome to Kwesi. You have those precious, some other Ernest Mancoba works with you. And then I'd like to also acknowledge the presence of Alain Spielman, Ernest Mancoba's good friend, who possibly could speak about Ernest Mancoba's working process. I have some thoughts about it, but Alain might well have more to say. And also Sarah Linya, who, whilst working at the Louvre, wrote a really wonderful and important piece of work. So welcome to Sarah. And then we have our great friend, champion of the arts and champion of justice, Justice Albie Sachs with us, welcome. Albie has played a very important role, forgive me if I call you Albie, if I'm so informal, in helping us to bring the Ancestor to a permanent place of exhibition to the Constitutional Court Art Trust, which we will be celebrating this wonderful, wonderful weaving of the painting in later this month. So I just wanted to mention those people who are in the house with us. And also just to draw attention to Vusi's comments in the chat about mathematics, languages, and totems. They're all very, very rich and very, very deep. And do I need to say anything else, Nazipo, or do you want to go back to try and getting Amo back online?
You know what I suggest? I suggest I'm going to try and text Amo to see if she's around. And also, if Amo, you are ready to speak, I think you should just raise your hand, since we have a couple of people who might like to speak. For instance, you just suggested that with the second question on that Philiswa raises on the process of Mancoba's work, perhaps we could speak to his good friend in Paris that's here, and then and then we can come back to Amo a little bit later. Alain. I keep seeing myself frozen. I'm not quite sure if I'm still here or Alain had, okay. Hello.
Hello. Well, do you hear me clearly?
Yes,
Okay, fine.
clearly. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm very pleased to be with you, and I would like to say how glad I feel having heard Bridget presenting all the posters, because it gives me the impression that Ernest is quite among us, and I think it's very important that these posters are presented in South Africa, because it makes Ernest painting living. And I would like to say, it reminds me when I spoke with him, with Ernest, he used to tell me a painting for me is two things. First, to do the canvas, the oil, and second, to present it, to put it on the wall, So art for him are those two things: to do the work and afterward to show it. It's important because his artwork are not very well known over the world, and he did not a big number of oil paintings, but and also it was extremely difficult during his lifetime to see what he was doing, because he used to live in a studio next to his flat, Rue Maison Dieu, and nobody were able to enter in his studio. It was his home, his living, his intimate world. And so the fact that he is not well published as other artists comes from that attitude he had to work alone. Even Sonia or Mark Wanga was not able to enter. They have to ask him, may I enter in your room? So he used to work like that, but well, we were able to see from time to time one work, or he did put in his flat, Rue du Château, well, a drawing on the wall, So this is the way how he was exhibiting his work. So I am very pleased to see that in South Africa, you did these posters, and these posters will go through your country, and you did that since quite a long time now, So that's very, very, very pleasant to see. Also, what I like, Bridget, is you have related his work with carves, with stones, with all sorts of painting done on different objects. And it is true that in his house, he got a lot of stone with him, And I remember we used to play with my children, with Mark Wanga, with different stones. It was, life was just like that. I would like also to mention that what gives Ernest to us is a sense of freedom. Because freedom was expressed in life, and no boundaries. So I'm glad that you put the emphasis on his universal attitude, open to all, and the fact that in South Africa now you're speaking to us, to Paris, to all over the world, I think goes in his spirit, and I think he should be very pleased with what you have done. Well, this is more or less what I can see. I appreciate also a lot what you have said on different paintings, and what I can say, for instance, when you mentioned the painting of 1976, for instance, at that period, you see obviously a man, a man in his painting, and through the different colors emerge, comes out the presence of a man. And he was fighting for that, for the positive man, Well, okay, this is all. I think we could speak a long time of the different paintings And it's a pleasure to do those comments. And again, I would like to congratulate Bridget for your work and Abdullah as well for these posters, which are quite very pedagogical and would be very useful to define creation, art, and also a fight for the reconciliation of man. What is interesting also in the Black Madonna is also the fact that you have in a lady, a black feature, a combination of two tendencies, two things, giving a unity. Let's stop there.
Thank you, Alan. Always good to have you. Thank you. Amu opted not to speak today, so she's there on the chat, but she will not speak.
Yes, I think. Yes, I think.
Yes. So, Bridget, you also felt like you could say something about Mancoba's intentions or his process. Can you speak to us shortly, and then we'll open it up to the floor.
I'd love to. And in fact, thank you, Alain, because what you've just said has confirmed my intuition, because my feeling has been that Ernest Mancoba went into a kind of shamanic trance while he was painting, because if you look closely at his paintings, how did anybody remember those precise color combinations from long ago in South Africa? How did he, he must have gone into maybe not a shamanic trance, but a very deep meditative space. So when you say, Alain, that he didn't allow anybody to come into his studio, he went into, it confirms for me that he went into a very, very deep space while he was painting. And in the film, he says, I allowed what was in my subconscious to come up. So he must have gone into his studio and closed the door and shut off the world and allowed all of these memories, because when you look closely at the paintings, you can trace all these Southern African colors and all of these Southern African meanings. That's not all that's there. Of course, that's not all that's there. But we from Southern Africa have to begin that process, because we are the ones, as Philiswa has been saying, the elders are starting to reveal the knowledge to her. And it's really urgent and important that, that Philiswa absorbs this knowledge and takes it forward and begins to understand the colors of our country as a painter, and that we together can use these things as keys to understand the meaning of what Mancoba is saying. So I'm very, very grateful for that comment, Alain, because it confirms for me what my sense was. Zipo, you wanted me to also respond to some of Philiswa's other comments.
Yes, but also, yeah, you can start with that, and then there's another question after.
I'm sorry, I can't remember them all now. I did respond to the question of the elders, which I thought was very important and very significant. And one of the things that we've been trying to do for a long time as the Art Ubuntu Trust is to try and understand more about the South African color palette and the different colors in the different in the different regions, how they're used for different meanings. I think the information that Vusi has been sharing in the chat is highly, highly significant in terms of us understanding, because again, looking at those 1990 works, the works from the 1990s, it's see that they're pictograms, but what do they mean? And I think the keys to their meaning are in I'll just read out what Vusi said. He said, strangely to me, Mancoba's alphabets, pictograms, language script appears to be a mathematical script, algorithms, geometry. My friend, the author, Zulu Motabo Zulu, could give us a totally revealing interpretation of Mancoba's approach. Zulu has deciphered the Sotho traditional alphabets, the patterns and designs on their hut walls and beadwork. This is certainly the direction of Mancoba of art as an alphabet, as a language. And there's no doubt about that, that this would be extremely productive. And this is the kind of thing we need to be exploring intellectually, and we need to be doing research in order to make these connections. And then he carries on to talk about the different totems. When Abdul Qadir was reading the Ancestor, he identified a leopard in the head of the ancestral figure. And we were wondering if that was possibly the Mancoba totem. We don't know. We don't know. We haven't been able to find out. But hopefully this kind of information can be explored further. And I don't know if there are any other issues that I've missed, or Philiswa that I've missed in terms of what you were saying. But I agree with you. You're saying that your experience of the exhibition in Pompidou, I mean, I didn't see it, but it's a lot to take in at first. Ernest Mancoba, I mean, it's so funny. Somebody said to me when his exhibition was up at the National Gallery in Cape Town in '95, said, "Oh, his paintings all look the same." And I thought, oh, you don't get it. You don't get it. Because it's taken years to unpack just a few of them. And maybe we still haven't even gotten there. So it's a collective project. It's a project we need to do together as South Africans, as Africans, and in the world at large, in order to try and get the message, because he was putting across a very deliberate message. There's no doubt about that. These are, I mean, just to go back, I mentioned in the beginning that one of the things that the exhibition helped was to develop a method. And it didn't feel to me that there was much in traditional art criticism and in the methodologies of traditional art criticism and traditional, there's the Kota figure, and traditional art history, which would help us to really enter the dialogue with Mancoba. But when I listened very carefully to what he said, so for example, he spoke about Charlie Chaplin, and he spoke about how he said art is not just to tickle and to entertain. No, it's something serious. So on the one hand, you can look at a Charlie Chaplin movie and you can enjoy the jokes, but on another hand, he's making a very, very profound message about the alienation under industrial capitalism. So I took those words of his about Charlie Chaplin. I said, okay, the writers in Europe and the international writers, they've spoken about the beautiful color, you know, that he's a beautiful colorist and so on and so forth. But is there something more beneath that? So that's why I think it's very useful to look at Ernest Mancoba's words as well as his work, and to engage in a dialogue between the two, because they do provide clues and keys to understanding. And you know, the question of South African colors is absolutely critical for us, not only in terms of understanding Ernest Mancoba's work, but in terms of understanding our society, our heritage. Because if we don't know the different shades of red in the Xhosa language, and we don't know the shades of red in the Ndebele language, and we only know Tushan red, what happens to us? We are dumbed down as a society, and we lose that mark of civilization, which calls for us to hold on to. Those are the two Inuit pieces. You can see them closer up. They're very tiny little pieces. I mean, you know, you can hold them in your hand like that. But apparently when Ernest and Sonia were living in Denmark just after the Second World War, there was a large exhibition of Inuit art, which had a very big impact on them, and that's why he refers to them. People, are there any other questions which I haven't addressed?
No, but I have a question for Abdul Qadir. I'm wondering very much about his process of creating these posters, you know, apart from perhaps having conversations with Ernest Mancoba and reading his work. What was the process like? I speak very fast, ne? Abdul?
Yes. I'm here.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes,
How are
hello. Can you hear me?
I'm well. Yes, I can hear you.
What is the question?
I was wondering about, my question was, I'm very curious about your process of creating this posters. They're very beautiful, by the way, not just informative. What was your process like? I was saying that I'm sure you had to go beyond only reading Mancoba's work and also having conversations. So, what went into your process of creating them?
The process of creating was simple. We took the quotation. While Bridget had a long interview with Mancoba, which she edited only 1/10 in that short film that she did. Is called Ernest Mancoba and Home, but the material was very vast. And what I did is that to read the material, to read the transcript, piles of transcript, and deduct. And as I said previously, Ernest Mancoba, when he speaks, he says you one sentence as a pictogram, but that sentence you have to decode and deconstruct in order to go to the real meaning of the word. And that is where we went to that process and we said, let's amplify the intention of every quote that he has done, being politically, being culturally, being ethically, being socially, whatever it is. And that is what we try to combine it. And in some indirectly, it's also the summary of the exhibition. Why that exhibition, what we did is to work toward encompassing the life and what made Ernest Mancoba. So that is the surrounding that and what shaped Ernest Mancoba. So aesthetically, a person or an artist is shaped by his society, and without using the too much Western academic terms, in a simple paraphrase is called it, a person is a person due because of other people. So other people shape it. So other people, what they shape is the communal knowledge that shapes and forms that person. And don't forget, he traveled extensively South Africa. He taught in Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, and his love for, or what do you call it, archaeology, geology, and all of this combined together gives a sense and meaning. But what struck me most is very important when I heard these things, and Alain is speaking and all these things. By the way, Alain, good afternoon. And good afternoon to everyone who's here. The very important thing is this. We have to understand Mancoba, according to me, one trend that I found very disturbing that comes from Europe, that a lot of Europeans, being academic, being curators and everything, they try to put Mancoba under their shield and they give up a European patronage. Or European saying that he was shaped in Europe and in consequence he's a European, which is completely and utterly wrong. Well, there is a quote in the poster where he says that this was the first poster that we did. And from there we unfolded it. When he says, you find African art in the museums and everywhere, but you don't find anyone speaking on behalf of that art. It seems that the trend of colonialism, it was that Africa does not have a history. And in consequence, we need mediators. We need people who speak on our behalf, but not Africans. Why they don't know, they are primitive. So it has to be someone. And that trend till today exists. And it's very ugly. And one of the things that, when I was with Mancoba, I asked him one thing. I said, Mancoba, I met 3 times exactly. The third time he was in hospital. And I called him from the train station when I was going to a film festival. And I said to him, what about racism? You don't mention racism, Mancoba. He was holding that frame in my hand, and he held it very strongly. And he said, man, we will have to talk separately. But he told me anecdotes, which is that you don't have to forget. When he was in the internal camp, inter camp, he was detained among Black people from the United States of America and all these things, the jazz musician and all these things. Where he wrote a diary and he was stolen and he lost that diary. And then when he went to Denmark and he was freed, one thing that it was very painful is that he became a farm laborer. And when he went to the pub to have a glass of beer, they didn't allow him to come in. They said to him, stay at the window, we will offer you the beer from the window, as his money doesn't have value. But at the same time, he kept that optimism of humanism and all these things. And he had that strength. There are in the Pompidou Center, there is 2 famous pictures. One with him and the Cobra movement, with him, his wife, and his son, where some other member of Cobra refused to be in the picture with him. And there is another picture taken with other people except Sonia Wonga and his wife, Mancoba, and Mancoba, Sonia, and Wonga. And that trend till today exists. They used to call him the black dot of the Cobra, but they don't mention it. So now when you talk about Bridget spoke diplomatically about that the Westerns, certain Westerns, they could not conceive the concept of spirituality, of African spirituality, which is a sense of shame. And they condemn it being racist, Afrocentric, and all these things, like if it's something dirty, that spirituality originated here. Humanity originated here, without talking about spirituality. The abstract notion of artistic expression originated here. So that is, in few background, is a trial and error from our side too, to present something valuable that till today people have difficulty digesting it, and they try to patronize, but they forgot one thing: knowledge cannot be patronized. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdulkadir. Now is the time for anyone who would like to, who has a word or two, or who has any questions, for either Bridget, Abdulkadir, or for Philiswa. Now is the time. Hello, Bridget. Bridget, that's your hand.
Fine now. More. Okay. Naima's key.
Malik, can you please mute our guests? We have some guests whose microphones are on.
Okay. I wanted to pick up from what Abdulkadir was saying, because the process of preparing this exhibition was so wonderful, because we were allowed into the vaults of different museums around the country. And it was so extraordinary to find the riches that are in our museums in terms of objects from other cultures, as well as many, many objects from our cultures here in South Africa. And since then, the call for African art to be repatriated back to Africa has really gained a lot of ground. It's quite amazing the kinds of discussions that are happening around that. And I just want to alert us. Isn't that an extraordinary photograph on the screen at the moment of Ernest Mancoba's stick? Anyway, we have these incredible riches here. And in the basement of the British Museum, Creda Motwa visited some time ago, and as Professor Patika Ntuli frequently points out, and said that if these objects come back, it will be incredibly healing of our wounded spirit And one thing I'd like to mention, I think Barbara Voss, the artist Barbara Voss, is online, or she was earlier, and she and Lionel Davis were amongst the people who participated in a New Year's Eve party we had for Ernest Mancoba when he was here in '94. And Lionel and I have often discussed how there was something about Ernest Mancoba's presence, and he didn't say very much, but he made us all very, very much more aware of African art. We all began to see African art with new eyes, with fresh eyes, as a result of his presence. And I have this tingly feeling, I almost have butterflies in my stomach feeling that there's going to be something very profound that happens when this art comes back. It has to come back, and that I think it's going to release us in some spiritual way. But we also have to think about how we're using the material that is in our museums already, because there's really, really rich, amazing material. I would like to see a project. I've been lobbying the Department of Arts and Culture for years about this, whereby everything that, and Abdul Kader as well, everything that's in our museums gets photographed and gets put online. Because if you saw right at the beginning of the project, there was a map which showed all the different places we went, and we went to peri-urban and rural areas. And as I said, I grew up in a small town in the Eastern Cape, but through my father's books, I was exposed to art. But there are community art centers throughout the country, and if each community art center had a computer and a link to all the museums and galleries in South Africa, every child in South Africa could know about the Bloemfontein shells. They wouldn't have to see them physically, but they would know that they exist. Could be translated as the Constitutional Court. The entrance to the Constitutional Court has all the different languages of South Africa. The annotations of the art could also be explained in all the different languages of South Africa. There's a lot we can do, which is fairly simple. It requires a little bit of imagination and a little bit of conviction and will to make our two traditions of art, both the Western and the African, available to all the kids around South Africa. So that was just a little comment that I'd like to make, but I would really love to hear from others. I'd love to hear questions and so on, and continue the discussion.
Can I say, what I found also interesting with the posters is that there's not much information about the artworks. And then I went online to actually check and saw that there are no titles. Also, a lot of them are untitled, or they're written drawing, painting, and the date and the medium. And from what you have told us in terms of the decoding, I'm just wondering if that's what Mancoba actually wanted at the time, intentionally so, or I don't know, in him thinking about home, in him thinking about his background, and in him using these colors, and in him going into what I think you said, a trance-like moments in working in isolation as well. There was no one way or one word of defining for himself or to communicate that to others, that this work means this through a title. It's just a thought I have, maybe the fact that we have to now decode what is on the images or what is on these artworks, these colors, these lines, his words, that he had to actually speak about his work in relation to his life, then give them a specific title that limits them to one thing or one idea.
You drunk?
Or that. Okay. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, to just one meaning or one way of interpreting his work that would limit what we're having as this discussion now, where we're opening it up to so much more that can be said about the images themselves, and also what he has said in his own words about his work and about his life, and in how he created the works, those who were able to witness him create the work, or yeah.
All right. There's a response to that, Philiswa, on the chat. Bridget wrote that there's a map of all the posters which goes with the set, explaining dates, names, and mediums of all the work and allocation. And we have
I think, Sipho, that Philiswa was asking a slightly deeper
the
question.
titles of the paintings, no?
Yes, I think she was, Philiswa, am I correct? And what I understand, I think Elsa told me this, I'm not sure if it's in her book, Elsa Miles, you know, who wrote the biography of Ernest Mancoba and did the huge retrospective exhibition at JAG in 1994 of Elsa and Sonia, which, Philiswa, just in relation to your comments about the way the two Georges Pompidou exhibitions were separated, when Elsa was preparing that exhibition, Ernest wasn't happy about Sonia being left out of it, and he insisted she was included, and the exhibition was called Hand in Hand. And he speaks very beautifully about their relationship and their exchanges as artists. But just going back to the question of the naming of the works and the meaning of the works, as I said, I think Elsa said to me that there was something about the way he structures that totem figure. You'll see often there's a V at the top. There, you can see it exactly in this one that's up on the screen now. There's a V at the top, and that the meaning of that was that the mind was open, that the mind had to be open to all ideas and all possibilities. You know, Ernest was exposed to, he grew up in a Christian family. You know, they were in Mfengu, they were first generation Christian converts. He was clearly exposed to Marxism in very profound ways. He was exposed to many, many ideas. But at the end of his life, he said there were only two values that he held, one in each hand. And the one was, do unto others as you have them do unto you, and Ubuntu, Muntu and Gamuntu and Gabani Abantu. Those were the two values that he needed for life. So he simplified things, as Abdulkader was saying, he simplified things, he reduced them to their essence, but at the same time being open to larger meanings. I think that was all I wanted to say, but I just wanted to say also that, Philiswa, I think that there are two people in here today, Elaine and Sarah, who might like to say more on that question. There again, you see the open thing in the head is open and so on. But I see Bongiwe has her hand up, so I'm going to mute myself and give it back to you, Sipho.
Yeah, please, Bongiwe, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. I don't think I have a question per se. Probably it's a statement. The postcard looked very nice, Bridget. Thank you for that. And this is actually the statement that I wanted to make is with African art is the way that most people curate African art is I'm just trying to find the right word to use, but I feel that sometimes they leave out the artist when they curate the work. I don't know whether it makes sense. So the reason I'm saying that is I was listening to Philiswa, and Philiswa is having, she's asking, how do you really decode the work? And then my answer will be, or what I think with all the different works that I've looked at, is only if you actually know the artist himself, like who the artist is, the values of the artist, and what the artist stands for, and you have the, what's the word? For instance, Bridget, you said something about the colors and their meanings and everything. So what I'm trying to say is that for African art, it's not just you putting an object there or an art object on display, but it's more than that. Because for people to be able to sometimes read into the work and understand the work more is when they actually look into that hidden part that we, like the curators, don't really speak about. They just put African artworks there. And sometimes I think Philiswa said the same thing, saying that when she visited, I don't remember which art space, but the African art, like the beadwork, it was just beadwork that comes from Africa. There was no differentiation. There was like, this is just what African artwork is. And that's the problem that we're having with most art institutions. They will just curate a room with all art, with all African objects, but not really bring out like a conversation. Or when they, like, for instance, with the postcards, I love how you have juxtaposed those small art objects, like in between, like, for instance, where you had the beadwork that was connecting those two art pieces, and also on the bottom where you will use Mancoba's art piece, and then you'll have these small totems or masks on the, what do you call it, on the bottom of the art pieces. For me, if only we can try to understand the artists outside their artwork, then it will make sense when we read their artwork. I don't know if I'm making sense, because the stories that they tell, for instance, with the postcards, even reading the quotes that Mancoba was saying, those allow us to even connect what we are reading on the screen based on what he was saying, and it starts to make sense, because we cannot make sense of something that we do not know unless we have a brief history. And also, obviously, the other part will be with our art education, we miss this part. We are not taught this part. We are just taught how to read lines, how to read, how to look at the painting, the way that is structured. Is it aesthetically good? Does it represent 1, 2, 3? Instead of reading beyond what we are seeing. Because with Mancoba's art pieces, there's a story. It's not just an art piece, there's always a story. He's always telling a story through his art pieces. He's not just painting for the sake of painting or doing his sculptures for the sake of doing them, but he's always telling a story. He's always telling a history. And I think that's why he keeps saying that we cannot move forward without knowing our past. And that's what he keeps showing us, even with the last the Ancestor piece, the last video that we watched last week, like how it started. It was actually giving us like a piece of history. This is what the whole process was for me to get to where I am. So I think maybe if we look at those things as well, then it will make it easier for us to be able to interpret these type of artworks. Also, yeah, having our own time to go and research the archives, because going to the spaces, we just find things as they are without the hidden meaning that we are looking for. We are not allowed to interrogate these art pieces. And that's actually what Mancoba's work is asking us to do, to interrogate what we are looking at. Don't just look at it at face value, but interrogate and find your own meaning out of it and make sense at what you are seeing. So that's the only thing that I wanted to add.
Thank you, Bongi. I don't want to put anybody on the spot here, but Bridget feels very strongly about getting comments from people like Sarah in the room. Would you like to make any comment on what was shared today, Sarah? No?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Yes.
you. Hello, welcome.
Good afternoon to you all, and thank you, Bridget, for the wonderful presentation, and thank you all to all the participants. I'm very interested in the way, Bridget, you present the dialogue between Ernest's works and works from different parts of the world, because it was really important for him, this vision of the universal and the dialogue he was looking for. And I'm wondering, because Bridget, you visited his studio in Paris and you filmed it, and I remember all the images and the postcards on the wall. And did he comment all these sources, his relationship with these images he chose to put on the wall of his studio?
Should I answer, Zipo? Thank you, Sarah. You know, those few days that I spent with Ernest and Wonga in Paris in 94 were really extraordinary. And I have to say that the focus of our conversations were very much more about his life story, although there was a moment where he spoke about Sonia's work. I asked him about Sonia's work, and he lifted the maquette of her sculpture and held it in his hands while we filmed, and that features in the film that we showed last week. But we didn't have a deep conversation about the particular works on the walls at that time. You know, I'd just been making a film about Governor Mbeki, and I was in close contact with Jane Gould Tabata, who in fact, he had asked Jane Gould to go with him to Paris. And then Tabata hid her passport. And that was Tabata's way of declaring his love for Jane. He prevented her from going to Paris with Mancoba. So Jane and Ernest were boyfriend and girlfriend in the 1930s. And she, I met her in Harare early in the 1990s, and she spoke about this artist who had invited her to go to Paris, and she told the story, and then she ended up having 6 decades with Tabata. And then Governor Mbeki used to speak about this artist called Stereo, who he admired and loved. And it turned out, we discovered from Elsa Miles that this Ernest Mancoba was Stereo, because Ghulam Gould, Jane's brother, had seen him off on the boat, which took him to London in 38. And so she tracked back through Ghulam Gould's great nephew, and to me, and so on. And so that's how we made those connections. So when I went to Paris, I was in this extraordinary position of living in my head was in 1930s South Africa, because I was interviewing Governor Mbeki for the film. I was talking to Jane Gould about her life story, just as a friend. And I heard about Mkai from Governor Mbeki. I hadn't grown up knowing about Mkai. I heard about the meaning. And so when I started talking to Ernest Mancoba, there was this incredible kind of, how can I describe it? I mean, he must have found it very weird that this young white woman from South Africa, I was young then, started talking to him about his world of the 1930s, the world that he'd left behind. And sometimes when I look back at the questions I asked, I said, where did those questions come from? They just kind of flew through me. As a lot often, it often happens like that when one's working on something about or with Ernest Mancoba. So my engagement with his work was piecemeal, because then I saw a large body of work when he had the retrospective exhibition later that year in Joburg. But again, I was filming, and I had an hour, literally an hour, with a cameraman and the work to film it. So we couldn't absorb any of it. And then he came back to Cape Town in late 94 and early 95, and the exhibition was at Iziko. And that's when I started talking to him a little bit about the work. But at that stage, I was a filmmaker. I was thinking about his life story. I was thinking about his relationships with Gov and with Jane. I was thinking about what he thought about South Africa. I was thinking about his philosophy. Sorry, that's my cat putting her tail into the picture. And sorry, and I think she wants some attention. And so the real engagement that I had with Ernest was after he died, with his work was after he died. It was going to look at the work at Iziko and thinking, oh my heavens, I can see things here that I never saw before. And then going back into the interviews, as Abdul Qadir did as well, and engaging what he said, reading his interview with Hans-Ulrich Obrist, reading everything else I could lay my hands on, and trying to use his words to decode what he said. So the works that I chose for the exhibition that weren't his works, that were in dialogue with him, were works that I chose as a result of his life story. So if he spoke about Ramadan with the Gul family, and then there was this beautiful Indonesian bowl because the mother of the Gul family was from Indonesia, descended from people from Indonesia, and so on. And then I thought, and it was amazing how the items themselves began to speak, because I knew he, even in the film, even walking next to the Seine, he'd collected a stone. And then I'd heard that he used to collect from the Petersburg Stone Age implements. He used to collect them when he was teaching at Philiswa Senior Secondary School. And so I thought, I have to get some stones. And I went back to Ezekiel and I said, the one thing I haven't got from you is I need some Stone Age stones, implements for the exhibition. And then I looked at them and I said, oh my word, these colors are the colors in his paintings. So a lot of it was serendipity. A lot of it was just very rigorously following the process of what he'd said about his life and the stories that he told. But this is a long answer to your question. We didn't particularly talk about the work on the walls in his studio. We spoke about Sanya sculpture, and that was the main discussion that we had. So that was a long answer to a short question.
Thank you, Bridget. We have Abdul Kadir's hand. It's been up for a while now. You can unmute yourself, Abdul Kadir.
Yes, what do you call it? Thank you. There is I want to answer for Bongiwe. There is a statement that she made. You see, when an artist, Mancoba says, the role of the artist, he speaks the unspeakable and says the unsayable. One single word speaks the unspeakable and saying the unsayable. So it doesn't have to conform to politically correct or something else like that. And when he paints, he says, it's almost Freudian, whatever is in my subconscious comes out. And don't forget, there are two ways that every artist, being a filmmaker, being a scriptwriter, being whatever it is, has two methods of working: looking at and looking from. Looking from is that when you when you have to look inside yourself and project out what's your thought, is a looking from. So you reveal your background, your culture, your story, whatever you said before. Look at. But when someone comments your work, he doesn't look at, he doesn't have the same, what do you call it, understanding of you or your psychology or your background history. Is the methodology is very easy. He looks at, and that is mostly what Western Europe does, and Western academics or Western critics or Western, they look at rather than looking from. And that is the methodology where you can understand when the work is coming from within and looking at. That is what I wanted to say to Bongiwe, that's naturally, there is a story, but that story is understood from when you are speaking from within. So looking from, and your message to the world. But when someone looks at you, he sees you flat. It's not dimension. You don't have a dimension. And worst of all, when he follows the norm that Africa does not have a history and everything is primitive, that's naturally where you being cataloged, put it there, and finito. Paternalism and all these things comes into place. That is what I wanted to tell you. Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
May I say a few things just?
Yes, Alain, that's you.
Just, I would like just to say a few things to Bridget, and after just what she said, is first, when Ernest came in Paris, he was doing design and he was a painter, a sculptor. He had done a lot of sculpture in South Africa. And after he passed through the school, les Arts Décoratifs, he met Sonia. He became, in a way, a painter. And on the contrary, Sonia, who came from Denmark, came in Paris, and when she met Ernest, she was a painter. And during her lifetime, she became a sculptor. So both have changed, and I think this must be said when you said that Ernest presented you the work of Sonia. They were very close, and they had to. Well, he as a sculptor became a painter, and she as a sculptor became a sculptor. And both the couple have a wonderful child, Makwanga, who became an artist. So they create in Paris, in the center of Paris, in the area in the 14th arrondissement, a family of art, a sort of a nest where they were speaking and doing art, more or less. And Mark Wanga was not only a painter, he was a poet as well, and well, it must be said that as a family, and there are in the art, some family of artists, they have built a family of artists, this must be said. And also, I would like just to mention the fact when you say, Bridget, that you must prepare yourself to get back pieces of art. We agree totally, but I think we should also think of a little bit the same in Paris, because they have lived in that city, and we would be very pleased to have some pieces of art from them as well, or to do a connection between Paris and Joburg or Cape Town. And to finish also to what just Andrew said, I agree totally. The fact that you must see on both sides, from inside and from outside. And this is, as I mentioned, the sculpture called Double Unity, express exactly what Andrew just said.
Thank you, Aline.
That's okay.
We'll run out of time, but before I close this, I'm wondering if Bridget, you would like to say some few words before we wrap up.
No, I just wanted to thank Alain for his comments. And yes, the family Mancoba of artists are deeply touching. And one must never forget that there were three. And in fact, the very last time we visited Ernest Mancoba in Paris, he had Mark Wanga's work up in front of him, and he was considering it and reflecting on it. And it was very beautiful to see that relationship between father and son at that point, which wasn't always an easy relationship, but at that moment it was so touching to see that artistic exchange between them. I'm very conscious of the fact that there are two people with us, Justice Sachs, who's played such an important role in building collections in South Africa, bringing his collection of Mozambican art and donating it to the University of the Western Cape and making it available for us. Important artists like Malangatana, who we wouldn't easily see in South Africa, and also the role that he played at the Constitutional Court in terms of building an art collection, and the significant role he's played for us as the Art and Ubuntu Trust in helping us to get the tapestry of the Ancestor located there. And also Kwezi Gule is here, as I mentioned earlier. He's the custodian of the largest collection of Mancoba work in South Africa, and has the special privilege of possibly seeing it every day. And I just wonder if either of them would like to say something before we close. I have nothing to add, except that thank you very much for a wonderful session. Thank you, Philiswa, for the questions that you raised and the very honest way in which you explained your process of engaging Mancoba's work. And it was really resonant for me of my own process, because it's a lot to take in, and it requires a long time to kind of absorb it all. And then, of course, yes, we don't want to deprive you of the African work, which is important in your lives. We just want some of it to come back, most of it to come back, not all of it. But yeah, I mean, it's a heritage for all of humanity. But I think our society is still very spiritually fractured, and this great Sangoma said that it would help us, and I think it would. I think it would. Symbolically, it would help us enormously. So that's all I have to say. And thank you, Zipo, and thank you, everybody else.
Okay. Kwezi, have you got any words? I don't want to put you on the spot, you know.
Hello.
Hello, Justice Albisex. Welcome.
I heard my name mentioned and then somehow I went off. Am I invited to say a few words?
Yes, we thought you were running. Welcome.
No, I should have been having a good Saturday afternoon nap. Instead, my brain has been fizzing and it's been fantastic. And what a marvelous discussion. Really what I wanted to say was, in a sense, how magnificently defiant Mancoba was, because we were so proud of him. He refused to be a Bantu. He went abroad. He was avant-garde. He was an African who defied being trapped in an imposed segregationist view that Black art is not really art. It's weaving, it's basket work, it's carving. And now he was right in the avant-garde of world developing art. So we were kind of proud of him. And we learned about the cobra, and we even liked the idea cobra is an African serpent, a slight Africanism in the very name cobra. But also we were a little bit angry with him because it seemed so remote from our struggles, so far away. But again, one can see he also refused to become a township Black artist. He refused to become a struggle artist, even if we were clamoring for that. And in the long run, what's very strange to me, but interesting and fascinating, was that he placed himself as part of what he saw as universal art, refusing to be a Bantu. And now we learn that, in fact, he was a Bantu. He never lost the Africanism, if you like, in him. And he was able to make a marvelous connection between these deep roots in terms of emotion, light, color, shade, feeling, imagination, dreaming, that he imbibed as a young Black person growing up in oppressive apartheid segregation in South Africa, with some very grand notions of free artists reaching out to all humanity. And for me, it's very marvelous that this work is now coming back, fusing the universalism of human spirit, of human endeavor, and the freedom that artists were developing to use line, color, shape, materials to almost escape from the immediate
Terrible connection.
Albie, you've frozen. We're not hearing you at the moment.
Maybe he's affected by the electricity.
Okay. The network kicked him out. He'll probably come back in a second. I think they have a terrible connection over there. But I would like to thank everybody for participating in today's session. Most especially Bridget and Philiswa for your presentations. Thank you so much. everybody else would like to share some of this material, if you know of anyone who is either a bona fide teacher or who might be interested in this discussion or conversation, please tell them to head over to the Art and Ubuntu Trust's YouTube channel. All of these videos will be there. Justice Avisex just joined us. We might just, if you would like to pick up from where you left off, Justice, we're still here. Is your connection better now? Please unmute yourself, Mr. Albisex.
There we are. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
I was just reaching my grand, beautiful conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And it was to say, somehow in a very beautiful way, the work that Bridget and others are doing, linking up with the Constitutional Court, represents that connection between the universal of all humanity with the very intense, special South African quality and our aspirations and our hopes and dreams. And it's not through transcending and going beyond his deep African roots. It's almost coming back to bringing something very vast and universal and non-parochial into his endeavor. And the theme Ubuntu fits in so magnificently with it because it's becoming the foundation of what we were trying to achieve through the Constitution at the Constitutional Court, a vision of rights, of interrelationships that are so magnificently presented in his paintings and in his materials and in his weavings. So this is really just to say a huge thank you. Thank you for disturbing me, perplexing me, confounding me, marvelous conditions to be in when you want to advance your thinking. And thank you for providing so much information and so much inspiration.
Thank you so much. That's a perfect closing. I would like to tell you a little bit about next week. Next week, we will be screening a film on the master weaver, Joseph Ndlovu. That's next week at 2 p.m., from 2 p.m. till 3:30 or maybe a little bit later. And last week's session is our very last session of Art Saturday for 2021. Which is indeed very sad, but we have the YouTube videos that are available. So if you're feeling lonely a little bit in one of these Saturdays, just go back and read up on or listen to what we've been talking about this past few months. So that's it for today. Hopefully we'll see you again next week for our last session and closing. Have a good one, everybody. Cheers. And yes, we hope to continue in 2022. Keep your fingers crossed. Cheers.